A quick warning before we begin. This series contains descriptions of sexual violence and could be upsetting for some people, so please keep this in mind when listening. And if you've any knowledge of the actions of John Shaw and Jeffrey Evans, please email us, documentaries@rte.ie. Many of the Gardaí who worked on this case have passed on. The Gardaí we have spoken to for this series are all retired about 20 years.
Long time ago.
These guards didn't have to go looking for notes to jog their memories.
Would you talk to this girl, just to record a bit of it? For RTE, they're doing a podcast on it. Can she call up to you now?
Some of them, when we knocked on their door that day, recalled it instantly.
Do you think you can remember much?
Yeah. Don't forget things like that. Elizabeth Plunkett was her name.
These events were just so out of the ordinary in the Ireland of 1976.
It was the talk of the country at the time.
God, it was never heard of before, and it was an awful crime at the time.
Thursday evening, the 23rd of September 1976, Mary Duffy's family were beginning to go through a similar experience to the one Elizabeth's family had been going through for almost a month now.
They'd no mercy for Elizabeth, no mercy for Mary Duffy.
Nobody else can understand, and I don't expect anybody to understand. When you have to be through this to know, to understand, to realise the pain.
I'm Ros Purcell from RTE Documentary on One. This is Stolen Sister, Episode 4, Confessions. While the whole Castlebar community in Mayo went into shock and a huge search began, Mary was being held captive in a forest 80 kilometres away by John Shaw and Jeffrey Evans.
It was dark. It was about 9 o'clock p.m. I went into a tent in the trees in about 100 yards.
The statements and words of Sean Evans are recreated here, using the voice of actors.
John and the girl were still there. I got in the tent, the girl was in the tent, and I noticed a lump over her left eye. She said her throat was sore. I gave her food, and she was eating the cheese sandwich, but she couldn't swallow it.
The names of these two young women from opposite ends of the country, Elizabeth Plunkett and Mary Duffy, were now linked. When Gardaí were alerted by Mary's family, the similarities between her case and Elizabeth's were very obvious.
It was rather strange that a girl be missing down in Wicklow, British Bay, and a girl missing a couple of weeks after in Castlebar.
60 Gardaí are searching fields and woods near Castlebar for Mary Duffy, aged 23, who has been missing since Wednesday night. And in County Wicklow, Gardaí are still searching for Elizabeth Plunkett from Ringsend, Dublin, who disappeared near British Bay on August the 29th.
This was a big news story, and on Friday, the 24th of September, two strange men with English accents went into a pub in the west of Ireland.
It was broadcast an article about the two missing girls.
Garda PJ Corcoran.
But they were very, very interested in the news, very interested entirely in it, and listened very, very carefully. And when the news broadcast had finished, they left then.
On that same day, Garda Dennis O'Shea dealt with a reported break-in at a boathouse out at Lough Ina, about an hour's drive from where Mary Duffy was last seen alive.
It's a lock-up boathouse in the heart of Connemara. It was broken into and reported, and I went there and I discovered the break-in was through a back window and recorded it as a crime, and that was it.
The next day, in the nearby seaside village of Roundstone, a man saw two men on the bridge throwing things into the river.
I noticed one of the things as it threw into the sea in particular. As it opened up with the wind, as it was falling into the sea, it was blue in colour and looked like a sleeping bag.
You'll remember in our last episode, Shaw and Evans were spotted at Joe Keen's petrol station at Mam Cross in Connemara. And when news broke that Mary Duffy was missing, Joe phoned Gardaí.
He heard about this girl missing in Castlebar, And he said, them two guys that I filled the petrol for, I wonder who they were. He was thought about it, and the next day he rang the station in Mam.
It fitted with the car that some of the witnesses in Castlebar had seen. The Gardaí now knew who they were looking for, and the exact car Sean Evans were driving.
There was a red alert out then for those two people travelling in this car.
Mary Duffy's family, including her youngest sister Anne, were out searching for Mary.
It was extraordinarily busy, to know, with detectives and that, and the house was packed really, you know, with people calling, and it's a blur, yeah.
Back in Dublin, the Plunkett family were also in a blur, as Elizabeth was still missing. Her sister Bernie.
Those were 4 weeks of absolute living in a trance. The trauma of what's happened.
Elizabeth's friends, like Mella Bush, had been watching the news unfold with horror.
It was all over the news with poor Mary Duffy. Again, she was just whipped into the car. I mean, her tooth was found outside the telephone box. So that was the force. I mean, I reckon Elizabeth went the same way. She just literally whipped.
And Elizabeth's boyfriend Damien, who she was so besotted with, was struggling to make sense of everything.
It's hard. It's very, very hard to kind of imagine how Damien felt. I mean, she was my best friend, but she was Damien's more than best friend. I think just they were crazy about one another. Damien went to, I think, one of these diviners and said, look, expect the worst, she's in water.
On Sunday, the 26th of September, just days after they had abducted Mary Duffy, Sean Evans drove into Galway City at night.
There was a disco in Galway in the Ocean Wave Hotel in Salt Hill.
It was a cabaret place, a very popular place at the time.
Like all Gardaí nationwide, Garda Jim Boland and PJ Corcoran in Galway City were looking for the car Sean Evans were last reported driving.
There was a message in the station to keep a lookout for a black Ford Cortina Mark II car.
We were keeping an eye out for it. I was the driver of the car and PJ was the observer.
We were driving out the prom on a Sunday night at about approximately 11 o'clock.
PJ was watching the cars on the left. I was watching the cars on the right, and we were driving slowly.
And we spotted the car parked on the left-hand side of the road.
Two fellas went into the car.
Garda Boland and Corcoran had just found the two most wanted men in Ireland at that time, and they called for Garda backup.
I spoke over the radio and I said, ask the Galway car to come to Salt Hill as quick as they can. The two men started up the car. I put on the headlights. I was driving slowly, and when the Galway car said, we're behind you now, I said, when I stop, you catch the passenger and I will catch the driver. And we did.
1 month after they'd been released from prison, a month in which they had managed to devastate so many lives, John Shaw and Jeffrey Evans had finally been caught.
They didn't resist. They hadn't hope. I asked the driver for his name. He gave the name, a false name.
They were transferred to the Garda station at Eglinton Street in Galway City and put into separate cells. Gardaí were mobilised from everywhere. Guards like Christy Riley in Galway.
We were all called in the middle of the night to investigate this case, and I thought that Mr. Shaw was an extraordinary type of personality. He did look, if I may say, vicious, you know. But Jeffrey Evans was a different personality. He was more relaxed than Shaw was.
It was only 5 days since Mary Duffy had gone missing, and everyone hoped she was still alive, maybe even being held captive somewhere. When Gardaí went through Sean Evans' possessions, they found a receipt for a caravan in Connemara where the two men had been living.
I gave the number of the caravan. That's how we knew where they were staying.
Garda Jim Boland went straight there.
I expected to get Mary Duffy there, but there was no sign.
Back at the station, Evans and Shaw were still protesting their innocence and saying as little as possible.
They were uncooperative. They were very vague about their travels, what they were doing in Ireland and the whole lot. They were very, very vague about their movements in Ireland.
The next morning, the morning of Monday, the 27th of September, Shaw and Evans woke up at 9:20 a.m. John Shaw asked to go to the toilet, with a plan in mind. Garda Christy Riley was on his way back to the station after being in court in Galway City.
I saw two of my colleagues running down and a fellow running in front of them.
The man running in front of the two guards was John Shaw. He had somehow escaped.
He went to the toilet and the window was big enough to get out, and he got out and round the back and he took off down the street. I chased after him. It was hard to grab him because, you know, when he's going away from you, it can be very hard to grab. He resisted, but there was no choice. He was a pretty strong guy, but we were that way too.
Shaw was quickly returned to his cell. Now, a specialised detective unit arrived from Dublin. With the chance that Mary Duffy could still be alive, there was an urgency to the job of the detectives who had just arrived. One of those was Jerry O'Carroll. He spoke on RT Radio in 2012.
Mary Duffy hadn't been found, and there was a possibility that we might, if we could get to her where they had her in their hideout, that we might be able to save her life. That was the overwhelming sense of the whole investigation.
11:30 a.m. Questioning began.
Sorry, I cannot help you. I can only deny it.
John Shaw was refusing to answer any questions at all, as one of the interviewing Gardaí recounts in his statement.
He said he was not in British Bay that night at all. Again, I pressed him to tell us if he had given a girl a lift in a car. He paused for a long time, then put his hands over his face.
11:30 a.m. Shaw refuses to give his real name. Says he can't help with the investigation.
There were no girl. We didn't lift any girl.
In the other room, Shaw's accomplice Evans admitted to being in Arklow and British Bay, but nowhere near any missing girl. His timelines didn't add up.
Oh, I'm mixed up.
Remember those boots that were found in the woods near where Elizabeth Plunkett went missing? Gardaí asked Evans had he lost any of his belongings.
Yes, I missed a pair of boots. Black boots, size 6, having heel tips on. Heels with brass screws in them.
Gardaí had also brought up that piece of cardboard in British with the name Geoffrey Murphy written on it.
That's me. I used that name when I first came over to Ireland.
7 p.m. Presenting him with the evidence was backing Evans into a corner. And suddenly he began talking.
She's in the sea. I'll tell you about it.
Evans admitted they had abducted Elizabeth, that they had taken her to the woods, raped her, and the following day, John Shaw had killed Elizabeth when Evans wasn't there.
I knew there was something wrong. Shaw was very white in the face. He told me the girl was dead.
This was a huge but devastating breakthrough. The first confirmation that Elizabeth was dead, and Shaw and Evans were responsible for her murder. John Shaw was in a different interview room being questioned.
I have nothing to say.
And later that evening, he erupted. Garda JP Nolan was in the room.
He started to roar loudly, jumped from the chair he was sitting on and pushed the table violently against me, knocking me on my back on the floor. As I fell, I saw Shaw holding a chair over his head with his two hands, and he ran to the other end of the room, pursued by Garda Kennedy. He banged the chair off a glass cabinet which was against the wall, and the glass was sent in pieces from the cabinet. He struggled violently, but we succeeded in getting him to his feet. His appearance was wild.
God help me! God help me!
Shaw's brought back to his cell. 11:10 p.m. Back with Evans. Gardaí were questioning him about the disappearance of Mary Duffy from Castlebar.
Oh, I don't know anything about her. I was never in Castlebar.
Midnight. Garda Dennis O'Shea arrived at the station with two other Gardaí. They questioned Evans, who at this stage had been interrogated for over 12 hours.
He just I don't know, I can't recall. I didn't do this, we didn't do that. I don't know where Mary Duffy is. That was his mentor, you see.
It was pointed out to Evans that the disappearance of both girls would appear to be identical.
If I had anything to do with the Castle Bar girl, I would admit it, but I could never do what I did in British Bay again. I can see it before me most of the time. I cannot get it out of my mind.
But Garda O'Shea kept asking the questions.
He says, you asked me that before, but I said, I'm going to ask you again. I'm asking you to tell the truth.
Meanwhile, after Shaw's earlier violent eruption, he went to sleep for a few hours before Gardaí took the unorthodox decision to wake him in his cell and begin questioning him again, as Detective Jerry O'Carroll later detailed.
And I came back into the station around 2:30 in the morning, and I was thinking about Mary Duffy out in the mountains or held somewhere with her life in mortal danger, and I decided to break all the rules at the time, which I did.
This unorthodox approach to questioning Shaw later gave him grounds for legal appeal. But in that moment, Detective O'Carroll says he was focused on trying to find Mary Duffy alive.
And I went down into the cell and I told the jailer, take out Shaw, and I brought Shaw into a billiard room, and it was in the billiard room at 2 in the morning, I suppose against all the regulations. I got talking to him and we had this extraordinary conversation. We said a Hail Mary, and halfway through it he just went berserk, and then he broke.
Okay, I'll tell you everything.
And made this incredible confession.
Shaw now broke down in the interview room and began to cry.
You can write it down. I want to tell you everything that happened.
About all the two murders and the intended killings that him and his partner were going to engage in an orgy of killing across Ireland.
Shaw then related what happened at British Bay, Castle Bar and Lough Ina, that he and Jeffrey Evans abducted, raped and murdered both Elizabeth and Mary. In a nearby room, around the same time, Gardaí were continuing to ask Evans the same question.
Where is Mary Duffy now? We know you were involved. Where is she? So that was it. Until eventually he says,
I'll tell the truth.
They asked him, was she still alive? Evans shook his head.
She's in a lake.
The lake was Lough Ina in Connemara.
I'll draw a sketch. Get me a pen and paper.
Cautioned him. Did he want to make a statement? He didn't have to make it, so he was agreeable to that. And he went through the whole thing.
Over the next couple of hours, Evans gave a detailed statement, including that John Shaw murdered Elizabeth.
Statement of Jeffrey Evans. Date of birth, 12th of June 1945. I asked him what were wrong, and he told me that the girl was dead. I didn't believe him. So I walked down lane and into the trees, seen the girl lying there. She had all her clothes on, slacks, t-shirt. I went back to John at the car and asked him what had happened.
The statements given by Shaw and Evans were very similar in their detail, except when it came to the actual killing of both Elizabeth and Mary. Both deflected responsibility to the other man, contradicting each other.
I wanted to let her go. Jeff said we couldn't. I went back to John at the car and asked him what had happened. He told me that he had been asleep and she tried to get away. He ran after her, grabbed her and said she was screaming, and he tried to shut her up by putting his hands over her mouth. When Jeff come back, he said, "Why hadn't you killed her? Remember what happened in England?"
What happened in England is that Shaw and Evans had raped 2 young women and a teenage girl, but had not killed them, meaning the men could be identified. They did not want this to happen again.
I didn't want to do it. It was Jeffrey made me do it. He kept saying, "Oh, remember what happened in England, John?" And he said, "It happened and I don't want to talk about it." I said, "What the fucking hell do you mean by that?" I was implicated. I asked him, "What were we going to do?" And he said, "Well, we'll have to do the same as we did at Wicklow." I know what that was.
Shaw's detailed statement was read back to him by Gardaí, and he signed it with an X, saying he was unable to write.
I can't write.
The following morning, Evans and Shaw were escorted by Gardaí to 2 locations in Connemara so they could locate the remains of Mary Duffy.
Galway Gardaí then took them out in separate cars and they pointed out the scenes. They pointed out Ballynahinch Wood, where they had murdered her.
They directed Gardaí to an area in Ballynahinch where Mary Duffy was last alive.
That's where the tent was, and this is where it happened.
We find parts of her clothing, and there was tint there, various bits, scraps of food and things like that.
The next stop was nearby Lough Ina.
They pointed out Lough Ina, where they dumped the body and all. Lough Ina would be a very quiet place at night time. There was very little traffic there at night time.
Garda Christy Riley was very close to Shaw for the whole thing.
Shaw was handcuffed to my right hand, and we brought it out, and then they pointed out where the jetty was and where the boat was taken from and all that, and they pointed in the direction west towards the mountain.
That's the place where we got the boat. I remember we bumped into that on our way out.
There were also details that nobody but the murderers could have known.
That's the spot where we burned her things. I threw her rings around here somewhere.
They told us where they put the body in there.
We went down to the lake on our right and dumped her in.
And where they'd put Mary's body was in Lough Ina. An underwater specialist unit would now need to be brought in. The following day, Wednesday, the 28th of September 1976, Gardaí drove Shaw and Evans across the country to where Elizabeth Plunkett was last seen alive. Unbelievably, that very same day, that was the day Elizabeth's body was found.
But you've been here all your lives?
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Can I sit beside you here? Is that all right?
This is Jack Harper, the man who found Elizabeth's body, which washed up at Duncormac in County Wexford. He is now 85 years old.
I was looking at my own television here at about half an hour before. This girl from Dublin, Elizabeth Plunkett, appeared on it. I could still see from her missing, in the case of missing persons.
That afternoon, Jack went for a walk.
Well, I just went for a stroll around the local area here. It's tidal, you know.
Something caught his eye.
I thought there was a bit of plastic in the distance.
On his way back, he decided to take a closer look.
So in the evening time, I just said I'd check it. I just went, when I was near it, I said I'd just check. Because every hanging washes in there, you know, on a high tide. And sure, I come across a body. And so we notified the Gardaí.
Local Gardaí came out to preserve the scene. By now, Elizabeth had been missing for an entire month. The Garda statements of that night detail how Gardaí stayed with Elizabeth throughout the darkness to care for her remains.
On the foreshore at this townland, I saw a human body lie facing downwards on a grass patch near the high water mark. The body was naked, and though badly decomposed, I could see that it was that of a female. I remained on duty in the area until the arrival of Garda Kelly and Shanahan at about 2:15 a.m. I detailed both Gardaí to remain on duty, protecting the scene until relieved later that morning.
John Harbison, the state pathologist, then arrived to examine the scene, and later that day, Gardaí were able to place Elizabeth's remains in a coffin. Back in Dublin, Elizabeth's family, including her sister Bernie, were about to find out the news.
I'm coming over Ringsend Bridge and a cousin of ours was just across the road and she roars over at me. They found her. They found the body. And I'm going, oh my God. I took to run, but I got to the house and everyone was there and they're sitting around. I said to me, Mum, what are they saying? What are they saying? And then she told me. And that's when she said to me, you know, this is something we're going to have to face. And it came on the 1 o'clock news and it said that a body had washed up and it's thought to be the body of Elizabeth Plunkett.
Elizabeth's family and friends slowly began to take in this terrible new reality. At the same time, Gardaí brought Sean Evans to British Bay as they continued to gather evidence.
Where's the start of it?
Garda Jerry Hallahan from Wicklow was there. He still has the notebook he had with him that day.
I remember turning left after McDonald's.
Where he jotted down what the men were saying as they went around British Bay.
I think this is the place. We went down there.
We went up the lane.
I threw her shoes somewhere here.
Threw her shoes somewhere, but
I don't know where it was.
I don't know where it was.
Put my hand in my pocket and I found her watch. Threw it in there.
Oh no, it's all changed.
It's all changed.
Gardaí now knew that Shaw and Evans had dumped Elizabeth's remains in the sea. But they wanted to know how and where.
They stole a boat and they rowed out about a mile or so and dumped her over the side.
Shaw and Evans brought Gardaí to where they'd stolen a lawnmower from a shed. They'd tied this to Elizabeth's body, rowed out to sea and threw her remains overboard.
This is the shed. We got the lawnmower in the shed. 2 oars and a bucket, I think.
What they did with our body is unspeakable. Unspeakable.
We burned the clothes in one of these fields, in a tip.
With Elizabeth's remains now recovered, and with Sean Evans having confessed to abducting, raping, and murdering Elizabeth, everyone thought justice would take its course. No one could have imagined, least of all Elizabeth's family, that almost 50 years after she was taken from them, they'd find themselves fighting for justice for Elizabeth.
Elizabeth's family, constituents of mine, have asked me now to make public their plight today for the first time since the murder of their sister nearly 50 years ago. And they've asked me, Taoiseach, to make a specific request of you, that the government would commit to providing sufficient
Join us next time as we continue to follow the stories of Elizabeth Plunkett and Mary Duffy.
Then the trial became the next ordeal. It was the biggest case of its kind at the time.
Stolen Sister is narrated by me, Roz Purcell. The music is by Oscar-winning composer Stephen Warbeck and performed by the RTE Concert Orchestra. Readings in this episode were by Patrick Dunn, Henry Nicholson, Dan Leahy and Donal Lennon.
And sound design and orchestra recordings are by me, Ciarán Dunn.
Production assistance is by me, Shauna McGreevy.
And the series is written and produced by me, Nicoline Greer.
The executive producer is Liam O'Brien. If you've been affected by any issues raised in this episode, please visit rte.ie/helplines. Till next time, thanks for listening.